just want to say before we start, I was in your shoes. I used to go to these events all the time when I was in grad school down at the New School a couple of years back. This was back pre-COVID, where they would actually have them in person, and hopefully we'll get back to that soon. But the Center for Communication was fantastic. I would just highly recommend everybody out there go to as many of these events as you can, even if it's stuff that you don't think interests you, because you might find yourself surprised. So with that, I want to just introduce, before we get into it, all of our panelists here tonight, and we're just going to go around the room here. We can, you guys can introduce yourself and maybe just give a few lines, sort of like the truncated version of what you're up to, maybe a little bio stuff. So let's start with you, Gabe.
Hi, I'm Gabe Fleischer. I'm the author of Wake Up to Politics, which is a daily political newsletter, about 50,000 subscribers in all 50 states and across the globe. And I'm also, like many of you, a journalism student. I'm a sophomore here at Georgetown University.
Next up, we have Hannah.
Hey, I am Hannah Winarski. I am the head of writer development at Substack, and that means I am part of a team that helps all Substack writers grow and develop the publications of their dreams.
And last but not least, Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Trinidad. I am the incoming manager of newsletter strategy at GQ. I'm on day 2, but I was previously a newsletter editor at New York Magazine.
Fantastic. Great stuff there. First of all, let me just apologize in advance if you guys hear screams. I have a 5-month-old daughter in the room next to me, and this is about the time that she starts to lose her mind. But bear with me, as we've all been bearing with each other for the last year and a half, or however long this has been. So I think that, guys, before we start to sort of get into the discussion, I thought that it might be helpful to kind of do a like a quick history, or sort of like an oversimplified, what I consider to be my kind of unifying theory of the current news environment out there. So if you'll indulge me for a second, and feel free, when I get through with this, to just tell me I'm wrong, or we can debate aspects of this. But I think that it might be useful, especially to those folks out there who are just starting out in this crazy business. And I think that it's really important to understand that the overall media environment right now, we are really in the middle of a watershed moment in this business. I think people say that all the time, but it's especially true right now. For decades, and you learn this when you were in high school and in college, if you were a journalist or if you were a writer, your job was to get your words out in front of as many eyeballs as humanly possible, right? And for decades, for centuries, really, that meant getting it more or less in a newspaper, or maybe a magazine, right? Newspapers made money off of classifieds, they made money off of advertisements, and the people who pay for classifieds and the people who pay for advertisements, as a general rule, want their stuff to reach as many people as possible. So you had this kind of like match made in heaven between publisher and content creator, journalist for years. And it was great, right? Okay, well, along came the internet changed all that. You have publishers. The legacy publishers were very slow on the uptake, much too slow to catch on as the business model started to shift out from under them. You've got new players like Facebook and Google coming in. Now those two alone eat up most of that old ad revenue model, right? And basically they're doing it with just kind of like a slightly updated version of the original business model. It's designed, they make money by selling your attention to advertisers, but they do it with algorithms. So all of this is happening in the background, right? Then I think you have a lot of outlets, big entrenched players sort of warming up to this new idea over the last 10 years or so, that the way forward is this subscription-based model. So you have the big national papers, the Wall Street Journals, the Washington Post, the New York Times, realizing that their success in this new landscape really lies in growing their subscriber base, right? And the easiest way to grow your subscriber base, the path of least resistance, at least, is to create and provide content specifically tailored to those paying subscribers, whether that means cultural, political, social, artistic, whatever, right? The stuff that you know that your audience is going to like. This has basically been the MO of cable news, which is where I spent a portion of my career prior, for years now, but you're just starting to see it pick up in print as these old guard publications start chasing the promise of paying subscribers. So I would argue that this move to paying subscribers, I would argue that you could argue at least that it has been bad on balance for the established media industry as a whole, especially for players in hard journalism, the stuff that is expensive and time consuming to actually produce. Though, again, that's a debate that I'd happily have with anybody at any time. And it's not why we're here tonight. But it also just doesn't really appear to work very well for many of the big players, except for the biggest ones, right? Local news outlets are having a very hard time figuring this out right now, even while the New York Times and others are breaking records with their digital subscriptions. I say all this because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes it sound like I'm coming from this sort of like curmudgeonly like I'm this old guy who's just saying like, oh, the media business is broken and whatnot. That's not necessarily true, especially if you're just starting out in this industry and you're not part of sort of this established media ecosystem. Now, one of the things that has been one of the silver linings, I guess you say, has been this explosion in niche publications, like Substack, like Patreon, this so-called creator economy that you're seeing really start to become something everywhere you look now. And I say all this because what this shift in this business model is doing is creating all of these new opportunities for both the creator and the consumer. And that's why this is such an exciting time, I think, at least, to be particularly not even just the digital media business, but specifically in the new business of creating and publishing newsletters. And I just want to have this one quote from Jack Schafer, who's the media columnist for Politico. He wrote a couple of days ago, I thought this was a great quote. Right now, the newsletter scene is 1976 at CBGB in Lower Manhattan. Every band that plays there has got a recording contract because the labels know something big is happening, but not enough to figure out which band will strike it hot and which band is destined for no-hit wonderment. So with that, my first question to the panel, and thank you again for indulging me there. What makes a newsletter successful? And Kelsey, I'll start with you, but I want to go around the horn.
Oh, I mean, I think that's a huge question. I think especially on the kind of bigger media scale, and especially for like kind of legacy media, that's something we are definitely trying to tackle. I think that it really differs from publication to publication. I mean, being thrown into GQ now, really shifting my voice, learning the audience, is probably the most key thing you can do to make a newsletter successful.
Hannah?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about your really interesting intro lay of the land there. So I'm gonna like back into this answer a little bit, because one of the things I was thinking while you were talking about this old model is, there were big problems with the old model.
Yes. That
caused this disruption, right? And that have been around for a long time. I would argue that, this old model of based on advertising, there was always a third party, right, in between the writer and their audience.
Right.
Whether that was a publication or advertisers, there's this third party that tended to get a lot of the time the majority of the financial reward, right? Writers were not actually rewarded very well for their work. They were not paid very well, big salaries in these newsrooms. Only the very, very few are paid very well in this ecosystem. And then you get this layer, right, of technology coming in, and algorithms become that third party in between, along with advertising. And those algorithms are often based on rewarding not the healthiest incentives, potentially, right?
As we've seen time and time again.
Exactly. Right? Either kind of clickbait behavior, one-off clickbaits, or outrage or fear or what have you. And again, the writer is not getting rewarded, right, directly. And there's this third party in between the writer and their audience. So I would say, I think what's so amazing about the newsletter model is that now you don't have that intermediary, right? You have the ability for writers to publish directly to their readers. And in models like Substacks, to be rewarded directly for that financially. So when the reader likes what they're consuming, the writer puts something out, the reader likes what they're consuming, they reward the writer directly for that, and the writer, grows and benefits from that. So I think there's an enormous positive shift. I think that the difficulty comes from when you have a different model trying to move into a new model. Does that make sense? So some of the things that you're talking about with newsrooms struggling to do that, it's because it's different models. It's sort of like two boat problem. But so I think that to circle all that, to circle back around to what makes a newsletter successful, I think therefore super clear value proposition for your reader. Here's what I uniquely do, and here's what you're going to get uniquely from me. Does that make sense?
It does.
Sorry for the long speech.
No. And first of all, I want to table what you just said about intimacy, because I think that's really an important part of this. Someone just remind me about that in a second. And also, I don't want it to come across like I'm some sort of I'm anti-Substack or anti-newsletters. I'm a huge Substack fan. I subscribe to like more Substacks now than I can even keep track of. I guess my point was more that what you're seeing when I say it's bad news for the entrenched interests, right? It's because those are the places that are losing their not just talent, but they're losing eyeballs. And we can discuss sort of some of those reasons. Yeah. But first, Gabe, I don't want to forget about you.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with a lot of what Hannah and Kelsey said. I think for sure, and we can talk more later about kind of the intimate relationship. I think that is for sure in terms of what sets newsletters apart from kind of other forms of kind of delivering news to readers. I think that is a huge kind of boon that kind of newsletters can bring. In terms of what makes specific newsletters successful, I think Kelsey is right that kind of it varies depending on different outlets, and what makes Wake Up to Politics work might be different than what makes a newsletter at GQ work. But I do think what kind of unites them all, whether it's an independent newsletter or a Substack or at kind of a legacy media outlet, I do think readers are looking, I think, related to that intimate relationship with authenticity, with kind of unique voice. I think that's what sets a lot of newsletters successful. And that's why you see, and that's true of independent authors, but then also you see the New York Times at the morning, David Leonhardt trying to have that unique voice. At the Atlantic just announced a new push, a lot of, interesting thinkers of a lot of different perspectives. I think people are looking less for kind of the, kind of voice of God, just kind of delivering the news, like this is exactly what's happening, looking for more analysis, unique voice, trying to kind of build a relationship with the author, hear more about their experience, their perspective. I think the newsletters that do that really well, and especially if they can kind of combine the kind of old model of, obviously saying factual and accurate and kind of delivering the news of what's going on, but they can also kind of bridge it with kind of unique analysis and voice. I think those are kind of the newsletters that will rise to the top, no matter kind of the outlet or publication that's kind of delivering them.
Yeah, no, I think that everything that you guys said, right? Voice, authenticity, intimacy, to me, those are that's the secret sauce, right? And it's harder than it looks, but when you do it good, it is magic, right? And the newsletter that I write for Cheddar is called Need to Know. Has a fairly large subscriber base, 400,000 people. We have a very high open rate, and it is it's a general news digest. It's for, frankly speaking, it's for people not really like us. It's for people who aren't paying attention to the news all day long. They probably don't have a newspaper subscription. They're probably not watching too much cable news, but they want to know what's going on. They want to feel like if they can read one thing on their phone in the morning on their way to work, they have a general idea of what's going on in the world. They can talk about issues with their coworkers, with their family, with their friends. But I say that because, what I'm doing, I'm not creating original reporting there, right? Now, Gabe, I think that you are doing more original reporting, which is important. But what I'm saying is, when you're creating something that is essentially, commentary and a curation of news, that's why voice is all the most important, because you can get that anywhere. You can just go on Google and get a rundown of what the Google algorithm thinks are the top stories of the day. What you're getting with a newsletter like some of the ones that we produce, I think, is not just voice, but there's a human behind there who is making these decisions. And I think that sense of authenticity is really, really crucial. But Gabe, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about politics while I have you up on the screen here. When we're talking about voice in newsletters, Politico's playbook, at least to me, sort of created this kind of like insidery style that has become very popular, not just in political newsletters, but specifically in political newsletters. So just how do you specifically, Gabe, think of tone and voice? Especially because it's just you, right?
Yeah, no, it's something I think about a lot. And I think you're right that I think in terms of if to also give kind of the history of the newsletters themselves, I think kind of the early political newsletters where I think you're right, kind of go to whether like the Note at ABC was kind of famously kind of getting to 500, similarly with Politico Playbook, and even now you see it with Punch Bowl, newsletters that are, I think, very geared towards people. I'm now here in DC, so kind of here in the Beltway, but for most of the time I wrote the newsletter, I did it from St. Louis, which is where I grew up, and I started the newsletter when I was in middle school. But and so I think that is something I think a lot about, especially as kind of a young person, as someone who's writing for like a very diverse audience. It's always my goal, I think, kind of similarly like you said, not to be writing for the people that are reading about politics 24/7. I think, to kind of make the news accessible to people, no matter if they work in the White House or Congress, and I have subscribers that is true of, or if that's the one thing they read about in politics in a day. And it can be hard to kind of write for both. But I think something that is interesting is like I get emails from, I've done a lot these past few weeks, certainly about kind of the reconciliation package and the debt ceiling and different kind of complicated processes that are going on. And I've gotten emails from congressional staffers, people in the government, saying, thank you, I didn't really understand that. I appreciate you kind of spelling it out for me. So I think it's interesting to see, the kind of broad array of people that are looking these days, I think, for these kinds of explainers. I think for me, a rule that I go by is like anything that I write in the newsletter, whether it's an acronym or a term or a process, reconciliation, the filibuster, debt ceiling, if I feel like there's a chance that some reader out wherever might not know exactly what it means, I'm going to take the time, not just kind of wave it off and kind of drop the term and move on, really explain it, really do the work of kind of walking through my readers, what it means, why it matters, what's important, why people are talking about it, not just assume they've been kind of caught up to speed. So that's definitely something I think about a lot. And I think it is, especially in politics, I think you're right. There are newsletters that kind of write with the assumption that you've read, everything that's gone on with this story up to this point. And I think that's just not true for a lot of readers that do kind of need some of that added context that find that to be very helpful.
And Kelsey, just what's interesting about your background to me is just what's a little bit different about it is that, you're sort of working within this space, but while also attached to these bigger brands, be it New York Magazine or now GQ. How does voice work? Do you feel ever like you're penned in there, like you need to sort of parrot the voice of the magazine in the newsletters, or do you feel like you have more of a wide berth to experiment with your own voice? How does that work when you've got sort of this like big legacy brand behind the curtain?
Yeah, I mean, I can, I think you definitely, the reality is that, yeah, you do have to, and this is just like a valuable thing in journalism in general, learn a voice. And I think that it doesn't have to be a stifling thing. I think there's like so much you can do with a legacy and so many strings to pull at. I think for me, like the cool part about working within these kind of big legacy magazines is that you get to explore different audiences that maybe you don't associate with those magazines,
Right.
and kind of explore little niches and interests and obsessions that maybe the newsroom is talking about, buzzing about, and maybe want to onboard people to that idea, or maybe shift kind of our what we're looking forward to as like a whole idea associated with our magazine. So
Right.
I've never really found it very stifling, but kind of an opportunity to like kind of stretch the bounds of like our readership and what they can be interested in.
New York Magazine, by the way, does some of my favorite newsletters. They have, I would highly recommend, even if you don't live in New York, you should subscribe to New York Magazine. It's one of the best magazines in the world, but also their newsletter products have just always been fantastic. GQ's as well, but just speaking of your past experience. Okay, so we talked a little bit about voice and style. Hannah, I had a question for you about what we were talking about a moment ago about the benefits to some journalists in going to a platform like Substack, where they're really going out on their own. You said, if you're one of the top writers at one of these magazines or one of these big national newspapers, that's one thing, but not everybody is that, obviously. So what challenges are there if you don't have a big national audience and you're trying to break into this sort of creator economy, be it with Substack or another platform?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I think one of them is the kind of mental shift from I am a writer who maybe gets an assignment, who has the support of a newsroom, who is you have a structure around you, right? To going independent, right? That is what it is. It is not just setting up a newsletter, but it's kind of becoming your own media outlet.
Right.
So you have to decide what that's going to be and, kind of put the work in as if you are setting up your own media outlet. So I think that is a challenge, although we have a lot of ways. I think it's really interesting to see a whole kind of like ecosystem come up around supporting independent writers in doing that. In a kind of like market like economy, when that becomes a little more like freelance, you arrange for your own copy editor and designers and things like that. And these all become small little media outlets. That is one challenge. I think growing your audience is another challenge. You are also doing that on your own, and you have to kind of get smart about it. There's a lot of formulas for doing that. Most of them are pretty simple and boil down to getting it out there, right? Doing the regular work, and then doing the kind of like self-promotion piece of making sure you're always sharing that with the people you want to know about it, and learning to think a little bit creatively about, okay, so this is my first degree audience. They know about me now. Where do I need to go next? So that is a challenge. That's a different skill, I think, than just being given an assignment and going deep on it and then producing an article.
And one of the problems, just speaking as a journalist, is that we are not typically good at that kind of thing, right? People in this business, whether you're a writer or a producer, you're usually not very good at doing the books, or necessarily audience growth isn't necessarily your thing. So it's difficult. I'll tell you what you need to know under Cheddar. One of the things that we've had real success in with growing the list has been referral programs. And I know that we're not the only one. I know that some of the big newsletters out there, like the Skim and like Morning Brew, have really grown their audience like, tenfold just by doing fairly simple referral programs, meaning, you send this to 5 of your friends, we'll send you a magnet, right? Or you send it to 20 friends, we'll send you a coffee mug. That stuff really works. And I think people really respect, when it's coming from somebody that they know. It's a much easier sort of on-ramp, I think, than just sort of hearing about it out in the blue, perhaps.
And I think like one of the really exciting things is when you start seeing these, independent newsletters and writers using those moments to create interesting content for both audiences, right? It's not just like, let me send you a magnet or a mug, but it's like let me interview you and you interview me, or let's both go into this project together, and you're really creating a whole new level of value for both different readerships.
Right.
Over.
Actually, Hannah, while I have you up on the screen here, I just want to ask you about one thing that you're specifically working on, which is this writer in residence program at Substack. Can you just sort of talk for a second about that?
Cool. I'm so happy you asked about that. That's a relatively new program where we bring the world's most interesting writers and creators and illustrators and artists into kind of the Substack universe for a month at a time. We're in month 2 right now. Our first writer in residence was Adrian Tamina, who is a very well-known illustrator, amazing. And now we have this month Jeanette Winterson, the novelist and writer, and she's doing a month of ghost stories, super cool. So the idea is to get somebody in this universe experimenting with all the new tools and opportunities and content creation moments that Substack can give you, and then to have all of our emerging writers and people sort of just getting started or curious about what Substack is like, watching that experimentation for a month, and then hopefully everybody benefiting from it. So that's the idea. Yeah.
One of the things I just want to underline there, and tell me if I'm wrong, but what really struck out to me when I read about that is, we're talking about this in terms of writers and in terms of like journalism, but a platform like Substack, even if you're not a journalist and you have no interest in the news, you could potentially be using that platform to put out, you were talking about ghost stories, right? I follow a Substack of somebody who does like cartoons, kind of like political cartoons. I know podcasters who use Substack as basically the platform in which they pump out their podcasts every week.
Yeah. So what I keep kind of circling back to is like, we really feel that this is like an ability to build your own media outlet. So whether you are first an illustrator or first a musician, you know, with Patti Smith and Jeff Tweedy, or whether you are first a podcaster, you can build this sort of pipe where you are connecting directly to your readers, delivering that anchor content, whatever it is. And then there's a whole world of content around it. You know, you can send out a podcast episode and do a long sort of essay about what it was like to record that episode, or you can do an illustration and sort of talk about you food writers. So, you know, some of our most successful writers on the platform are food writers, and they'll do, you know, recipes and videos. And it's like a much more, it's sort of a whole content universe. You know, there is the simple newsletter tool, which is very easy to use. You can click a few buttons and set it up. But, you know, the grand vision of this is you build your own content universe, and you know who you're speaking to, and those people opt in and reward you for that.
That's fascinating stuff. I want to, just because this probably arguably the most important part of this whole thing is just talk about monetization. And I think, and Kelsey, I don't want to leave you out of here, but I just, I specifically wanted to ask Gabe first, just, you know, the way that I look at it, there's basically three ways to monetize a newsletter. There's paying subscribers, there's ads that you run within the newsletter itself, and then there's merch, which I don't really know if that counts. I don't know if anyone's actually like making enough money to pay their mortgage off of selling t-shirts, but probably there is actually. But Gabe, because I know that it's just sort of you out there, and I assume I'm not putting you on the spot by saying my assumption is that you have a shoestring budget, which is just, again, amazing that you're even able to put out the content that you are while also being a college student. But that is a whole nother story. But just talk to me a little bit about how you monetize. Yeah,
for sure. It's definitely, I mean, like you said, I think for me, something like the journalism at this point, I've been doing the newsletter for about 10 years. So for me, like the writing and the putting on the newsletter, that's kind of what I'm good at, what I enjoy doing. The other
stuff. Wait, hold on. You've been doing this, you're 19, right?
Correct, yeah.
You started this when you were 9 years old.
Yes, but doing it a long time. So before Substack even, but so I've gotten very good. I like to think, or getting better at the writing. The monetization isn't what comes naturally to me, like I think a lot of other journalists. But I kind of do a bit of a little bit of kind of 1 and 3 of kind of the models you put. So there's no subscribers. You don't need to pay for Wake Up to Politics. It's completely free if you want it to be. I've been very fortunate in that, you know, I have kind of a donate button on the newsletter, and I know who wants to donate can. And a lot of my subscribers have been very generous. Kind of just, a lot of them do it just like you would subscribe to the New York Times or to GQ or whatever it is. You know, a lot of them have recurring donations where they set up, you know, every month X amount of dollars. There's no requirement to give. But, you know, to help kind of support me. And then there's also a few other student journalists that contribute to the newsletter that are compensated for that as well. And then also merchandise, like you mentioned, you're right, not like a humongous source of revenue, but does kind of help, does add to that. And, you know, kind of Wake Up Politics t-shirts and mugs and sweatshirts and things like that. And so I kind of do a combination of those, kind of unlike most Substacks, a lot of Substacks, there's no kind of like tiers for me at least, where like, you know, if you pay, you know, if you do free, you get it X days a week. If you pay, you get it the other days, whatever. Everyone gets the same thing, but I've been lucky in that a lot of people appreciate the work that I do and have, you know, been very generous in supporting it.
Excellent. And then Kelsey, my next question is for you. And again, it just goes back to the experience that you have working in some of these legacy brands. When you're hiring somebody, or when you're looking at resumes, or when you need you know, somebody to come on board, somebody who perhaps doesn't have some hugely impressive resume yet because they're just starting out, right? I sort of remember being in college, and like the thing that used to drive me crazy was trying to get into this business. People would be like, well, you don't have the experience we're looking for. It's like, well, how am I supposed to have the experience? I'm just coming out of college. I'm 22 years old. I need to get the experience. That's why I'm here. But my question is sort of, what are you looking for in those when you're looking through resumes, specifically for sort of lower entry-level jobs?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been there. I kind of happened into this little niche journalism industry because frankly, like the only job that I could get after freelancing for a really long time at wherever I could was a production role. And this was kind of at the beginning of at least for legacy magazines, like newsletters. And so part of that role was like kind of compiling the link list of newsletters to send out to every day. And I kind of really grew to love it through doing it. It used to be kind of like an intern task, and now it has become like full-fledged.
Right. It's curation, right? It's like,
yeah,
that's the,
it is.
name of the
It
game.
really has, I think it's taken the industry to really a little while to recognize that this is like a real editorial skill and it's a real editorial product that has like a huge impact on like your whole publication. But like, to get back to your question, is honestly someone who is really eager to learn. It's really the new frontier for legacy media, at least, and someone who can have a lot of ideas and can think outside of what already exists is kind of what I think every newsletter editor in media is looking for, because there are just so many opportunities to have like even individual magazines within a newsletter, and that will branch off and expand your product base. So really just people who aren't really confined by what they believe legacy media is, and really envision what it will be.
Well, GQ is a great example of that, right? Because you think of GQ as sort of this like old school men's magazine, but now it's, you guys are doing a tremendous amount of work in areas that you wouldn't, at least the old, my dad wouldn't associate with GQ, right? And that that's great, because it opens up this diversity of thought and diversity of opinion that we're seeing like explode in this space. I wanted to just talk to you guys a little bit about like the concept of the inbox, which is going to be like a little, I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little too philosophical here, but like it's fascinating to me because your email inbox, right? We're talking about something, first of all, the technology that has been around for basically as long as the internet, right? I mean, email is not new, right? Like newsletters are not new. Back in the day, people used to subscribe to these like Usenet, old school newsletters that would sort of surface them, some of the things that were happening on the internet back before most people even had dial-up connections. And when I remember when I was growing up, it would be this place where you would write and respond to friends and family members. I mean, I remember logging on to AOL after school and like hearing the "You've Got Mail" thing. Gabe, you probably don't remember that because you didn't exist back then.
Could you sing the chime? Could you?
Yes, yes, exactly. And I'm curious about you guys, because I don't actually interface with my inbox that way anymore. It's now basically what it is for me is email is like this dump, my inbox, my Gmail inbox, my personal email. It's just a dumping ground of information, right? So I basically check it on every once in a while, but I check it religiously on the weekends, and I go through every email that I got that week, and I do the things that I need to do from there. I set up the appointments I need to set up. I read everything that I missed, right? I have 500 tabs open of all the Substacks from that week that I wanted to read. But that's just me. I'm curious, like, how do you guys think about and how do you interact with your inbox? And Hannah, I want to start with you because it goes back to something you said earlier, I think, which is about intimacy, right? You're meeting these people in their space. It's the same way when I do my podcast in the morning, I think about it in terms of I'm meeting those people literally in their ears every morning. I mean, I'm there with them while they're getting their kids on the bus to school, while they're on the subway on their way to work, while they're making lunch for themselves. And there's a real responsibility, I think, I think there's opposed to sort of like being on television or, reading a newspaper or magazine.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that you talked about, that kind of like old fashioned, it's like a letter relationship, really. I mean, this is, it's something intimate and it has a different expectation attached to it. It's a little bit of a different tone. I think that we, in all the noise of all the ways that we self-serve content and content gets pushed to us, we have maybe even like underestimated or lost track a little bit of the power of that direct connection where, we get a lot of junk emails, but I still make time for the one and look for a certain number in my inbox, right? And that gets my attention in a way that very little else does. So I think, there's a lot of interesting opportunities to making email better and some of the noise there that like we all are starting to suffer from. But or do suffer from. I don't know about you, but my inbox is
Yeah.
like, I mean, God, I don't even know, thousands and thousands, but I still look for those certain emails, and those get my attention in a deep, sustained way that is a little different from anything else, I would say.
Yeah. And Kelsey and Gabe, both, this is for both of you guys. Just piggybacking off of what Hannah just said, how important are subjects because I never know what the answer is to this when I'm writing my newsletter every morning, because to me it's like, okay, my audience, it's such a routine based thing, right? They're either reading it or not reading it. And if they're reading it because they like it. And it doesn't really matter what the news of the day is specifically, but the audience growth people are always telling me like, no, you need to do more A/B testing. You need to think more seriously about what you're putting in the subject, what stories are resonating. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think it matters.
Yeah.
Yes, it matters a lot.
Matters.
Yeah, it is your first like introduction of the day or whatever send to your reader, and it's your first pitch to open it. And I think yeah, I do think testing is really valuable. I think everything with newsletters is like an interesting dance of like testing and analytics, but also like kind of being confident in whatever you're doing and trying to steer that ship. But it, like I said, it's very delicate, and you have to check in on your readers a lot. And I think surveys are really great for that. And just seeing what they resonate, seeing their trends, giving them time to show you a trend, and being patient is like kind of the key on the subject lines, I think.
I would just say very quickly, I think you're exactly right. First, in terms of the inbox, like I think that is kind of key to creating those kind of intimate connections that we've talked about. I think for me, like what I love about newsletters, I really do think, I mean, I'm very kind of passionate about newsletters and like using them as kind of a content delivery device. But I do think that like you mentioned kind of the media, we're kind of at a turning point as kind of an industry. And I think a big part of that is this kind of trust crisis that we have, that readers aren't trusting
Right.
reporters anymore. And I think being right there in their inbox is a huge way to kind of fix that. It's not looking at it anymore like this person in an ivory tower at the New York Times, just one very far away from me. You know, people read Wake Up to Politics right next to a letter from a friend or a relative or their boss or their colleague or whatever it is. So I think being right there in the inbox, like you talk about, meeting them where they are, is a huge way that a newsletter writer can really kind of build the trust of the reader in a way that a newspaper or a magazine can't really achieve. And that is kind of the way you build that kind of intimate relationship, build the routine where, like kind of Kelsey was saying, or like you were saying, they go back to every day. I agree also that subject lines, I do think it matters. I mean, I just know, like, I'm sure all the rest of us, I've subscribed to, I think, dozens of newsletters. And like, I don't read them all every morning. And they do kind of pick and choose. Like, if I see a subject line, like, oh, that sounds really interesting, I will be more likely to click on it. There's some that I read every day, but there's others that if it looks interesting, I will. But if the subject line doesn't catch my eye, you know, I just don't have time to read it.
I feel like I've also noticed recently sort of a, which I'm not big into, but I feel like there's also subject lines have also gotten almost like clickbaity in a way that they hadn't used to been, and they didn't used to be. And maybe that's just because everyone's just fighting over that little sliver of your inbox. I forget who, but some digital media brand put out an email within the last week where the subject line actually like made my heart sink, and I wish I remembered what it was. But anyway, I think when we're just talking about the inbox, just to sort of close the loop on this, you know, it's fascinating when you think about it, right? Because what we're doing is we're sort of creating this like customized news feed for ourselves that rivals the ones that these algorithm-based news feeds on social media are creating for us. And I think that's a really fascinating sort of like just thing that's happening in society. I think people are really sort of like over the outrage machine, that the way that we talked about how some of these social media algorithms sort of feed us stuff because they know it's going to click our buttons, right? They know it's going to push our buttons. And the inbox, and your own inbox, is a place where you can really create your own. The other problem, of course, and again, this is a discussion for another day, digital media has a serious UI problem at the moment. I mean, I read a lot of news on the internet, especially local news. You know, it's almost impossible to read a news article on the internet in this day and age, right? You got paywalls, you got moving ads, you got pop-ups, pop-unders, auto-playing video, but your inbox is your space, right? It's yours, it's comfortable, and it's intimate. And I think that's sort of what we were just getting at there.
Also, I love
yeah.
this, just to connect the subject line up to the trust. Like, I think when you talk about things getting sort of clickbaity, it's like good to know on the writer side too, that when you are sending into an inbox, there is a kind of trust agreement there, and to like not mess with it. You know what I mean? To like honor it and try to strengthen it and not do maneuvers like that. It's probably a good idea.
Exactly. And
I'd
I'll
also
just,
say-
oh, go ahead, Gabe.
No, just like in terms of clickbait, like when I think of like the Substack, certainly that I read, like I feel like they're like, it's like anti-clickbait. Like I'm very like
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Substacks, like it's like once you've made that decision, like you say, to like subscribe and trust that person, you're kind
Right.
of saying like it's kind of throwing away that like you need to like alert me to get my attention. It's like
Yeah.
you're talking about some very wonky thing. Like that's, I think the best newsletters are kind of very upfront about that. Like
I mean, we make a joke. We have a sort of like internal joke, but we're totally serious about it, is that you don't really hate subscribe. You know, you don't rage subscribe to something. You are opting in a way that shows you trust it, that you like it. It's a we believe a much healthier model for that. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really important point that also doesn't get talked about enough of this. You know, people doom scroll and they hate read stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you may be an Upper West Side, dyed in the wool liberal. Maybe you hate read the New York Post if you see it on the subway, platform, but you're not buying it, right?
Yeah.
You're not going out there subscribing to the New York Post. You're subscribing to the New York Times. Back to what we said about, these news outlets that kind of, refract your own values back to you. By the way, I found that email I was talking about. It wasn't from a Substacker. It was from Cameo, which is that, you remember that, Cameo? It's the place that you can it's an app where you can pay celebrities to make videos for.
Well, that kind of makes sense. It's like content marketing then.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah. And their email was, the subject line was, your PTO request has been denied. And it was some kind of Halloween thing. Anyway, it made me unsubscribe because I was personally offended that came into my inbox. So that's just sort of shows you what we were talking about. What did I lost my train of thought here, guys, and I'm sorry. Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit about, we talked about monetization. I want to talk a little bit about analytics before we have to move on to Q&A. And again, this is not something that I'm particularly good at. But Kelsey, maybe we could start with you just in terms of how important is the actual, because one of the great things about newsletters is, the back-end companies here, whether it's Substack or MailChimp or whatever you're using, they have really targeted analytics, right? They can tell you who's opening, when they're opening, where they're opening, what they're reading, what they're clicking on, when they're bailing out. How important is that? How closely do you look at your analytics?
So, I mean, I think the benefit sometimes, being a journalist in a legacy media company is that you do have a really robust analytics team who you work really closely with. Definitely in my work, I've had to work with analytics a lot, where and I think it's hugely important. I think, especially as we are moving forward and creating new products, you want to look at the numbers before you make a lot of effort to revamp a newsletter, to introduce a new one and launch it, because a lot of that takes a lot of effort. So yeah, I think things with, Apple Mail have kind of changed the meaning of open rate here, but click rate has kind of been a default for many newsletter editors right now, as we kind of figure out what this new landscape is.
Not click through, but actually people who are clicking on the email. Not people who are clicking on a link in the email.
Click through,
right.
Sorry.
Okay, gotcha.
Click through to the site, yeah.
Okay, see, that's interesting because for me, it's different because I'm putting together, and Gabe, I think you're like me in the sense that we're putting together news for links to outside outlets. So I actually don't really care about the click through because I'm sending traffic to the New York Times, for instance. They don't really need me, but what's more important to me is that people are opening and reading. But it differs, right? There is no one sort of.
Right. For Substack writers, I would say the main thing people look at is how many shares, right? Because they're not trying to get people to click somewhere else. They're trying to get people to share, so the word spreads about their Substack, their newsletter. So shares or subscribes, or if you have a paying subscription turned on, then paying subscription. So those analytics, right, around what is this? How is my audience growing as a result of this? Then instead of clicking through to something else.
Right.
And also that, that subscribe model is also applicable to media outlets as well.
Right.
One thing I would say about click rate, like I do pay attention to both. I would say I'm the same way that most of my links, I have a lot of links to newsletter, but mostly to other news outlets. But to me, like that is a very clear show of like engagement that open rates aren't necessarily. Because if you think of your own emails, like I probably open most of like.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like if you're clicking on a link like a third of the way down the news or whatever, you're actually reading it. So it can be some ways it can be just a different metric of, okay, who's clicking the email, but then who's actually reading it, really engaging with it. What are people interested in? When I'm sending someone to a link about X topic, oh wow, a lot of people are actually reading that. Maybe that's the type of thing people are actually interested in rather than just like passively reading it.
Right. I think, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think those kind of numbers and those analytics can really get you to know your audience more. We often look at click maps as well to kind of see like what parts of the newsletter are working, where they're engaging. Are they making it all the way through? Are they looking for something like a fun kicker at the end to like respond to, or like a joke they can't miss every week? Those are kind of like the analytics you're going to see all of that in.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just shows that it's all important, right? But one of the great things about this business is the analytics are very robust, which is not the case in necessarily television or in streaming television. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, guys, before we go to questions, I want everyone to give a newsletter that you read regularly, not from your own outlet, and why you look forward to it in your inbox every week. Gabe, how about you?
I would say, I mean, I read like most of every outlet's kind of like main thing. There's lately like one that I read a lot is Punchbowl. It's kind of a newer outlet. I also like it's kind of an independent outlet. They've been doing really great reporting on Capitol Hill, throughout kind of the spending battles and everything that's been going lately. So I think they've been doing great kind of original reporting and analysis kind of as an independent outlet. I'm really enjoying them.
And what's interesting about Punchbowl is they launched as a newsletter. They didn't even bother with, do they even have a website? I think if they do, it's just their like archive of newsletters. So they're a newsletter first organization, and they're doing amazingly well, which shows you that this can work. Hannah, how about you?
Can I cheat and choose a Substack writer just because
they're
all different?
Fine.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
I am really enjoying lately The Real Sarah Miller, which is she's just got an incredibly unique voice and a really quirky way of choosing interesting subjects. Look forward to that.
Excellent. And Kelsey, last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, this one's a little bit of an oddball, but like, I love Quartz Obsessions. I love like not knowing what the obsession will be each week. And I love kind of their dedication to nerdiness and the deep dive that they go into from big
Quartz you're talking about. Yeah.
Quartz Obsessions.
And I do think that newsletter, like nerdiness, is newsletter gold.
Totally. Absolutely. It's like something I keep in the back of my mind as I keep newsletters.
Well, I'll tell you, I have two, but I can cheat because I'm the moderator. But I'll tell you, my first one is actually, and don't think differently of me by hearing this, but the one that my new favorite newsletter is actually something called, it's a Substack. It's called Hot Singles, and it's personals. It's personals for New York City singles, and I'm not in that game anymore, thank God. But it's what I love about it is it is such a novel use case for newsletters. It's this young woman, and she's turned this idea of the old school dating personal on its head and sends out these weekly, I think maybe bi-weekly emails, specifically with one single person, their photo, sort of like a Q&A with them. And it's like such an antidote to the dating sort of dating apps. I've actually got some of my single friends to sign up for it, but I love it because it's a fascinating way that I never in a million years would have thought of to sort of use the newsletter platform for something different. And the other one, I'll just say, Kelsey, I don't know if you worked on this or not at New York Magazine, but Are You Coming, which is the New York Magazine's, these sort of like nightlife dispatches from New York City, as it was
a huge Hot Singles was a huge inspiration for the the sweeties at the bottom, which is our personal ads. Yeah.
Oh, so that's awesome. That's another great one. And I sort of like to live vicariously, even though now that I have a baby, I don't go out much, but I like to pretend like I'm out there with everybody, and that newsletter does a great job.
I'm at its best.
Yes, exactly. Okay, guys, well, I want to get to the Q&As. So that's an important part of this. So I think first of all, let me just say thank you to everybody. This has been a great conversation. I wish we had more time, but let's start with our first question from Anna Bechtel.
Hi, it's Bechtel, actually.
All right, sorry.
It's okay. A lot of people do that. So I write for celebwell.com, and I'm also freelancing a little bit. And I was wondering if there was any difference between writing for a newsletter versus writing for, any other media website, like a long form article or a journalism some source. It's like, is there a difference?
Kelsey, you want to tackle that and I'll add?
Yeah, I'll take that. So I think voice, I mean, yeah, there are voicey publications for sure. Like, I think GQ is definitely one of them, but I think like you have to break down the establishment voice a lot more when it comes to newsletters. Like, you really have to kind of, and I think especially, as we go through journalism school, we kind of like train ourselves to like have this journalism mind, but like taking a step back and kind of being like, wait, how would I say this? How would I actually talk to a friend? How would I want someone to talk to me is like super key in creating a voice that resonates in newsletters. And that can take a little bit of like untraining in your mind, but once you get there, it's just like much more natural, actually.
Yeah. No, I absolutely, I agree with that. And I think, we talked about how important voice is, but I do think that newsletter, you can take a lot more risks, I think, in newsletters. You can be a lot more colloquial. You can really talk to your audience like they're standing right there next to you and not do the voice of God thing. And I think that works out. Also, I do think that for just people starting out in the industry, especially if you're a writer, the more that you can train yourself to do different kinds of writing, because it's not, it's writing for TV is different than writing for newsletters, which is different from writing for a website, which is different from writing for a newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. And the more that you can sort of like hone your voice for those different kinds of things, especially as all of these media companies become more omni-channel, you are setting yourself up for success, because you can come in and be like, I'm a utility player. I'll write your morning newsletter, and then I'll also contribute to the website, and I'll do a TV hit at the end of the day, which is what I'm doing right now.
All right, thank you.
Of course. Okay, our next question is anonymous. So we're going to hear from anonymous.
All right, yes. So the next question is, what about the use of strategy, since not everyone who is subscribed will see the email due to Gmail and other email systems continually filtering for spam? What can the speaker say about strategy in terms of analytics, email retargeting, and people who haven't opened yet, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is just kind of one of the realities of email. Like, there are different email kind of services that do a pretty strict spam filters. I know there are things you can do to kind of mitigate, ending up in spam. There's different kind of colors or like all caps, different things that are kind of triggers that will end you up in spam more. I think in general, like, I guess maybe the best tip is, when you first kind of get someone to subscribe, you see a lot of newsletters, a little spiel in terms of like adding you to your contacts or kind of moving it into tabs. Especially Gmail like has the different promotions, updates, forums tabs that can be confusing for people. This is something I face too, so I don't have great advice, to be honest. It's just kind of part of emails, to be honest, and you just have to kind of slowly guide people to make sure that you're ending up in their inbox in the primary tab in the right place.
Yeah, no, there is no magic answer to that. Do you guys, Kelsey or Hannah, do you guys have anything else to add?
I mean, I'm just curious, Gabe, do you like prune from your list people that don't open to that question? Do you kind of do a little bit of list hygiene periodically?
I know, so I use MailChimp is kind of the service that I use. I know they do some of that in terms of, like people that bounce and people if they haven't opened for a long time. I don't personally do that, but I know that MailChimp kind of does that for you.
Yeah. I mean, on Substack, we have like a way for you to kind of look through your entire email list, and I encourage writers to do this as much as possible to understand what the behavior of those subscribers are. So like, know what percentage are never opening, and know what percentage click to comment, and know what percentage always read, like, just to, I guess, higher level. That's kind of my big advice around this, is just like, try and dive in and understand how your subscribers are actually responding in as granular ways you can stand to do.
No, that's absolutely. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I would say like also that, like one of the strategies a lot of times like we would use would be like, you can downgrade a subscriber. So like sometimes like maybe a daily is like a bit too much of a lift, and a little for a subscriber, you can when they go to unsubscribe, you can offer them a weekly, offer them something else that is somewhat similar, but also maybe will tug at their interest a bit more. So like at New York Magazine, maybe that would be something like, oh, I want one great story, which offers me 4 stories I should read that day instead of a whole list from this vertical.
Yeah. And just back to what Hannah said, the pruning of the list, I think that's very important. It's a little bit in the weeds of this, but we often, not often, but we probably once a year prune our list and we get rid of, these newsletters that are out for a long enough time, you get these subscribers. It's unclear exactly why they subscribe, but they don't ever open it. So you cut them off. And if they really like it for some reason, they'll come back. But what that also does is it has the effect of increasing your open rate. So even if it looks like your overall list is going down, it's not high quality, quote unquote, subscribers. Okay, our next question is from Hannah Groman. She's got 2 questions. We're going to go one at a time here. Hello, Hannah.
Hi there. Ooh, sorry, I'm at work right now. As you can see by the little text that I've got going on around me. So my name is Hannah Groman. I am from Drake University, which is in Des Moines, Iowa. So I'm one of the only people on here who is not on the East Coast. But my first question to you guys is, getting started can be really intimidating, especially as a student. Gabe, I'm sure you're very familiar with this. Getting started can be really intimidating, especially with like time management stuff. So just any tips that you guys have for those of us who are just like starting to put feelers out there and get our feet wet.
You talking just about any sort of just getting your foot in the door in the sort of media business, or specifically to newsletters?
Specifically to like your own newsletter.
Yeah, first of all, I've covered 2 presidential debates at Drake. I love it. It's a great school. I love Des Moines. But I would say, yeah, it can be intimidating for sure. I think that's what's the beautiful thing about like this exact media moment is like, I don't think there's as many obstacles as you think. I mean, that's what Substack can show you. That's what hopefully my newsletter and a lot of others can show you, is that, there's certainly, an audience will not emerge overnight. That takes a lot of time. You won't find your voice overnight, but like actually to start your own thing, you can do in an instant. And that wasn't true even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Like so there's not that many building blocks and, there's not many obstacles in front of you, in terms of starting your own thing. I think what is difficult is kind of the next step. And so I guess my main advice that I give is just, do really think deeply before you start. What can you do that is kind of unique? What can you do that will stand out? Not just, kind of look around at the newsletters maybe you're receiving. What is something that you think is missing that you can add that no one else can? I think that is something I think a lot of people start out with something that's way too broad or way too general already being done, and that will kind of get lost in the shuffle. So I think if you really focus on something unique and then you just kind of start it and you kind of keep workshopping it, kind of slowly gain subscribers. Don't expect it overnight, but you hear feedback from them. That's the great thing about email newsletters, is people are very comfortable clicking the reply button. They will tell you how they feel about it.
Oh yeah.
And then you kind of get that feedback and you kind of keep seeing what's working, what doesn't. But yeah, that's the great thing, is that like all the infrastructure is right there for you, whether you use MailChimp or Substack or any others. It is kind of easy, and what's great, social media, you can share it and really, and that's what I found is like, it is kind of intimidating at first as a student, as a young person, but if you are putting good content out, people are very comfortable now with trusting someone in college, just like they do the New York Times, Washington Post. I think there's parts of that is good and part of that is bad, but it is the reality. And that's kind of the moment where in media is that kind of, it's all very democratized. If you're putting out good content and you're putting out quality work, it can kind of gain the credibility of these kind of legacy outlets. It does take a lot of work and persistence, but it's possible for sure.
Hannah or Kelsey, anything to add there?
I mean, everything Gabe said, that was like exact, that's totally perfect.
Gabe's going to be our boss in like a couple of weeks now.
You want to come work at Substack? Anyway, so the one other thing I would add is like, I think having a really good capsule description of what you're trying to do that really defines, like Gabe said, like exactly what you can do that no one else can do, and what people will get from you that they won't get anywhere else. That's like a superpower, having that, to hit the ground with that. At Substack, we encourage people to even boil it down to like one tagline, that like one sentence that like when people land on the subscription page tells you what it's about. Talk it out and get good at describing it, essentially. And then that will get you started. You will be so much farther along than people who use the writing process to figure that out.
And just, I mean, not to pick on you, Gabe, here, but again, because you're so young and you got started at this so early, you know, you're gonna graduate college with a substantial and impressive email list that has real monetary value, whether it's for you or whether it's for, you know, some a company or a brand. But all, you know, why I say that, not because you know, you need some sort of number of subscribers by the time you graduate school or anything, but you know, the younger you are, the more time you got to grow that list, and to, even if it starts with, it's, you know, just your family, right? That's, my first newsletter was just my parents reading it. Don't be, you know, you don't have to be like, you don't have to think that you're Andrew Sullivan or Matt Taibbi or one of these like huge name, bold name writers right away. Like it all starts from the same seed, right? But Hannah, I believe you have one more question.
Yeah, so Gabe actually touched on this already. My second question was kind of regarding like the crush of information noise. There's a lot of obviously growth of the internet is a great thing, but it also means there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. It's really hard to find what your niche is. So just if you guys have any tips for helping to like make yourself stand out a little more, I would really appreciate it.
I think that actually, Hannah, just to give you my take, I think that goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago with curation. You know, Kelsey was mentioning this before, like it didn't used to be part of the business, that it was kind of like a nobody really cared about, like the people who had to like curate the news, they weren't the real journalists. But because everybody is now just inundated with a fire hose of information from the minute that they wake up until the minute they go to bed, that has become a real value proposition for a lot of media corporations, being able to say, I'm going to cut through the noise here, and I'm going to find you you know, I'm going to nurture this specific audience, or I'm going to find you the things that nobody else is talking about, the things that are about to go viral that haven't. That's a skill. That's a skill. I don't know how you do it, but if you can nurture something like that, that's something that I don't think really exist in this business until recently. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Yeah, guys.
I would definitely say, like, I mean, foster your voice. Like, you should, you know, I think it isn't gonna come like in its full form immediately, but like the more you whack at it, like with anything in writing, the more you're gonna find where it feels good, and like where people resonate with you. And I think especially if you're creating your own newsletter, that's again like super valuable. That is like, you know, legacy media outlets are like kind of looking for people like who have independent newsletters to like hire and buy their newsletters. So I think like it's something that everyone is super hungry for, is like people being in touch with their voice.
And I guess the one thing I would say too, I mean, I think what Hannah said is exactly right about like having that capsule, having a way to describe it that's unique. And I think Carlos said earlier, just like try a lot of different voices too. Like I think for me, I was really hesitant at first about like, I think like experimentation is key, especially when you have, maybe if you have kind of a smaller audience as you start, you know, and they might not expect the same exact thing every day. Like I think just you have to read a lot of different journalists you really respect, and then, you know, just try to emulate different voices and different styles, not copy them exactly, but kind of look for what you really enjoy reading and try it out. And maybe it's something that's more narrative or more voicey, or maybe it's a little less, maybe there's a lot of links, maybe it's bullet points, whatever it is, you know, just try a lot of different, you know, formats and styles, and you know, kind of slowly piece together your kind of Frankenstein of what works for you based on all these different kind of styles and formats. And to me, that's a big part of it too, is kind of format of the newsletter, how it looks, and just see what kind of works and what you like, what your readers like, and over time.
We could do a whole nother panel just on design elements, trying to make something look good on mobile as well as on you know, Gmail desktop, emojis working, not working. But we'll table that for right now. I want to get to our next question, which is anonymous.
Our next question. So all of our panelists say content is key, but is there specific content that you're seeing work well for specific platforms?
The way I would answer that question is more like, is there a type of writer that this works well for? So like, more than what it looks like to us is like, more than like whether you're writing about food or politics or what have you, you know, fiction, cultural commentary, what seems to matter the most may be this like a writer who has this desire for this continuous direct relationship, for that to feel like an ongoing conversation, whatever goes into that conversation. So like, that's not everybody, right? People who want to like do a deep dive and go into a cave for 3 months and come out with like a very polished, finished piece, like that's a different thing than a writer who is comfortable speaking directly to their readers in an ongoing way, maybe with a slightly more, sometimes maybe more unfinished than others, or maybe a little more casual, maybe just as polished every time, but with a regular cadence. So I would sort of generalize it along those lines instead of by sort of topic and vertical. It's like, what is the phenotype of the writer? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kelsey, I'm sorry.
I would also say just like, it's gonna, in the world of like publications, I think it's like, it also depends on your readership. Like there's no like content formula. And I, during my time at New York Magazine, I was managing around 22 newsletters, and all of them were varying in length, in images. I had a really long Housewives newsletter that oftentimes would cut off and we'd have to edit last minute. But then I also have like, Are You Coming?, which is like fun and moves quick and has like a pace. And then you have One Great Story, which is one of our top performers, but that only has 4 stories in it. So I think you really need to hone in on what you're trying to accomplish with that newsletter, and get to know your reader and what they want, because it's going to vary every time. And that's kind of the beauty of newsletters. You can be quick on your feet and you can adjust, and you kind of need to be successful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not, the good thing about newsletters is there's much less friction than there is with a lot of other sort of forms of media, at least like TV, audio. These things need to be produced. There's some technical savvy that needs to be in them. A good newsletter, you don't really have to know much about how the infrastructure itself is working, and you can get your words out there with relative ease. I also have this sort of like pet theory that we're really sort of due for kind of like a rebundling of I feel this way about streaming, for one thing. There's like too many shows, there's too many platforms. I don't know what I'm paying for, what I'm not paying for. But I also feel this way about newsletters, right? Is there an opportunity to sort of bundle the best writers? Let's say my favorite 5 Substack writers into, I don't know, what is it? Maybe it's a digest. Hannah, is that something that has ever comes up there? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, we think about that definitely in terms of how readers want to consume, like power users like you, Carlo, like how they want to consume, so in a way that makes it manageable, and also probably helps you discover other interesting publications. But what is most interesting to us is the way that writers are beginning to bundle together in their own ways. Mm-hmm. So rather than coming in and become a curator or a publisher, or on our end, what we like to see is people that are creating interesting communities among each other. And it's a sort of like organic referral, like not get a mug, but you get access to my universe, or this like ongoing conversation that we all have. I think those kinds of writer-led, but like bundling, where it's benefiting everybody and it's sort of like organic and growing with their media empires, is super, super interesting. Something we want to see more of.
Andrew Sullivan, who is a Substacker, who I don't always agree with, but he's a interesting writer and interesting thinker. He started to do that, I've noticed, which is sort of elevate some younger and less known writers within his own Substack. Okay, our next question, I believe this is our last question, from Sinead Ann.
Hi. So I kind of wanted to ask about taking kind of like your own personalized work, whether it's a newsletter or other sort of written material, and kind of transforming it professionally. So basically, my friends and I, we have a newsletter that we share kind of just amongst ourselves, where we write about music or pop culture or film. And I'm curious about how y'all suggest we take that work that started a bit more personalized for us and transform it like professionally to showcase it to employers if we're aiming to work in this field.
Great question. And I love that. I love all these different use cases. It's like,
Yeah.
it's so cool to me. I would never have thought of that in a million years. But yeah, okay, Hannah, I got you up on the screen. Why don't you start there?
Well, I guess what I'm wondering, it feels like a multifaceted question. Like, what do you mean by work in this industry? Do you mean launch this into its own publication and get more readers for it? Or do you mean like show that you can do that and go into legacy media? Or do you mean show that you can, there's this, one of the interesting things I think about this whole major shift is like all of these writers on Substack going independent, when they reach a certain level of maturity, they start hiring people to help them with these media publications, right? Whether that's like editors or production people or social media, So what do you mean by, it's like a very open question, like, what do you mean by work in this industry? I think if you're trying to get attention for your own newsletter, there's a strategy towards opening it up to friends and family and starting to promote it. But can you maybe get a little more? Yeah,
definitely. Kind of what you hit on just there, that first bit of taking a piece that kind of already exists as itself and perhaps like branching it out to larger audiences.
Yeah. Well, in that case, I would say like start by adding all your friends and family, like send them a message to everyone with a good description of what it is and say, sign up, if you like this. It's like Gabe was saying, it's like slow and steady. Like, don't underestimate the power of like slow and steady. Start with your inner circle, let them all know, and then ask everybody in that circle to start promoting it and be regular and consistent with what you're doing. That is probably the most important thing you can do.
And I think when you say regular, I think when we say regular, we mean down to like the time you're sending it out, right? Like
I do. Yeah. You want to like train your readers to
Right.
look for that email in your inbox. So, and I think you can say, I'm going to do Tuesday at 11 a.m. or whatever, and try and stick to it. You really should try and stick to it. But there is room for, there's room to move away from that for a good reason, for something that exciting that happens, or a special occasion, or you need a vacation, whatever, but
Right.
do it with a reason, right? Don't do it because you didn't make your own deadline, just do it for a reason.
Piggybacking on what Sinead was saying, how important do you guys think social media is in this, particularly Twitter? Because I'll tell you, again, personally, I can only speak for myself, but most of the newsletters, I would say a majority of the newsletters that I've subscribed to come because somebody on Twitter whom I follow and respect promoted it, whether it was theirs or someone else via them. Kelsey or Gabe?
Yeah, like I would be happy to speak from a media perspective of like, we often work very closely with social. We've not only used Twitter, but also like Instagram stories, Instagrams as a funnel to sign up and hopefully make them shareable.
Mhm.
We've definitely seen like those kind of strategies be like really good and worked out well for us as far as like gaining new followers that maybe aren't as tuned into like a homepage or something like that.
How do you use it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just quickly, like in terms of Twitter, I think like for me that has been a huge source of growth. I think partly in terms of gaining new subscribers, but I think mostly like if you're someone like me, like I'm a student hoping to kind of gain more kind of break into the media industry to some extent. Like journalists are obsessed with Twitter and they're on Twitter all the time, and like it's a really great way to like get yourself in front of like people with huge followings. And if you're able to like get the newsletter, even just tagging, maybe there kind of sneaky ways you can kind of like maybe mention someone else's work in your newsletter and then tag the tweet in the newsletter, and then like a lot of them will see it because even people with hundreds of thousands or million Twitter followers, like they're looking at the notifications all day long, like a lot of journalists are. And then that's a huge way. If you can get them to retweet your newsletter, that's huge. And that can really just kind of put you in front of so many new eyeballs. So for me, Twitter has been a huge way to do that. Just kind of, and then you kind of become slowly known a little bit, in kind of media circles, if you're kind of there enough on Twitter in their feed, once kind of bigger journalists start following you. Twitter can be a huge source kind of growth, but mostly of just kind of, especially within kind of the more kind of like upper echelon of kind of people who are already kind of big in media, then if they share your newsletter, it can just kind of exponentially grow and grow.
No, I think we just have to underline that in bold, because that is, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, mostly hate, but you cannot underestimate its importance in this business, in the media business. Journalists, writers are on Twitter all day long. They're searching not just for their own names, but often for their own names. But getting in front of them, it is I think the easiest way that you can really surface your stuff to an entirely new audience. So that's a great answer, Gabe, and a great question. Look, this has been a great conversation. We talked about our favorite newsletters. I'll save that for another day. Anyway, we're coming up on our time here, so I just want to thank you guys once again. It's so much, it's easier to do these things in public, at least for me. So I appreciate everyone bearing with me, trying to steer this over Zoom. Hannah Winarski, Kelsey Trinidad, Gabe Fleischer, you guys are awesome. First of all, actually, you know what? Let's go around and just go tell everybody where they can find your work, or plug whatever you want to plug. Gabe, start with you.
Go to wakeuptopolitics.com, subscribe to the newsletter, it comes out every weekday morning.
Kelsey?
I mean, I'm new at GQ, but go ahead and subscribe on there. And also, I have a very soft spot for all of my work at New York Magazine. It's like really where I came up, and I still really believe in them, and definitely give those a subscribe.
Hannah?
If you're considering starting your own newsletter, Substack makes it super, super easy. And you don't have to worry about all of the, infrastructure and tools and putting it all together. You can just kind of click a button and go if you have a good idea. So definitely hope lots of emerging writers try it.
Yeah, absolutely. All great platforms, all great brands, all great people. As for myself, I'm happy if anyone ever has questions. Again, I am familiar with the Center for Communication from when I was on the other side of this, and I know how difficult and hard it can be to try and break into this business. So if anyone ever has questions, you can always get me. Carlo_Versano on Twitter is probably the easiest way. So with that, thank you guys again for your time. Thank you to the questioners and to all the attendees for your time. And if you missed any part of this discussion, I just want to make a point here. You can share it within your own networks. We will be posting the recording of the webinar on centerforcommunication.org. It should be up shortly. And with that, I'll thank you guys once again. Have a great night, everybody.